As a kid, author Roald Dahl always had a compelling influence on me. I remember his work being one of my earliest introductions to macabre ideas, especially regarding villainy and danger. While his work was prolific for its whimsical charm and sarcastic sense of humour and irony, I feel what underpinned his style of writing was how he never talked down to the reader when lingering on mature themes. Even for all his quirks, I never found his stories condescending. I always felt there was a sort of adultness that came across, unlike the softer approach of many other children's literature, especially when it comes to one particular story that struck a chord with me as a child. So let's talk about the witches. Just for context, I'm going to be juxtaposing between the book's narrative and the 1990 film adaptation because, while the book obviously carries its macabre themes much better, I can't deny the impact the film had in making up the bulk of my childhood nightmares. The film was a massive critical success, but commercial failure that was apparently detested by Dahl himself, and now lives in infamy as this borderline grotesque horror fantasy that'll make you reconsider ever thinking Cornwall was a nice place to visit. To those with a bubbled childhood, the story follows an unnamed boy who lives with his retired Norwegian witch-hunting grandmother following the death of his parents. After the grandmother falls ill with pneumonia, they decide to vacation in a luxury hotel where they encounter witches looking to exterminate children under the guise of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, or irony for short. Obviously, the film takes liberties with many details, like giving the boy an actual name called Luke to make him more relatable, and switching pneumonia for diabetes because it's more relatable, but nonetheless they're plotted quite similar overall. The general difference with the film, bar the conclusion, which we'll get to later, is that it's just considerably tamer in content, which says a lot when you have arse-opening scenes like this to keep you awake at night. That said, what really sets the grim tone for the story is the tale the grandmother tells Luke about her childhood friend who was abducted by a witch, only to reappear in her family's painting in a forlorn and lonely state, restlessly changing position each time the family looked at the painting, growing older and worn down, before one day she simply disappears, leading Luke to assume she must have died of old age. It's a very abrupt and unnerving way to establish the recurring theme of the story. I understand most people will probably think the scariest moment is the transformation, but I would argue there's something much more profound about this moment worth exploring. The issue I have with a lot of children's fiction is that they tend to cautiously maneuver around death and harm to children, but Dahl was one of the few writers to show younger readers that children fundamentally aren't invincible. Sure, it was never to the same dramatic extremes as something like Stephen King's It, but children in Dahl stories were rarely ever given any special treatment over adults, and if they were, it was usually more illusionary. If anything, their ignorance and naivety was more of a potential exploit, whether that be for a positive or negative effect. The grandmother's story grounds us in a believable world where good triumphing over evil isn't a guarantee. Like with many villains in Dahl stories, these witches aren't given the same whimsy as a timid fairy tale. They insidiously hide in plain sight, akin to stranger danger, behave deceptively, and manipulate their victims before acting predatorial when they've isolated their prey. Contextually speaking, it's quite harrowing for a child. In fact, if you just remove witches and fantasy from the equation, it's presented as a very real and tangible possibility. In fact, the boy learns this quickly when a witch tries to trick him into accepting a snake, which is a comedically ironic twist on the don't take candy from strangers concept. It's an element that's greatly elaborated upon later when we're introduced to this greedy little shit called Bruno, a dim, selfish rich kid pampered by a smug, uppity parent who gets transformed into a mouse alongside Luke. I assume Bruno is meant to be some sort of comic relief, but considering the book's more antagonistic presentation of him, where Luke actually despises him, he seems to represent sheltered children who would gullibly fall for any old stranger danger BS as long as you give them something to make them feel special. His parents are mostly absent from the book to play on bad, ignorant parenting, while in the film they're more recurring to heighten their complete negligence for him, nonchalantly assuming he'll just show up when he's finished ransacking the kitchen or something. Of course, there's the assumption that Dahl was lampooning this self-entitled bourgeois culture, considering how some critics have interpreted his ideology, but I like to think it's more of an extension to the palpable danger the story highlights. Going back to that painting, it furthers into the existence of death as a catalyst to the conflict, given Luke and his grandmother moved to England following his parents' untimely death. The tragedy takes a certain essence of his childhood away from him, and now he has to mature early and confront his fears head-on, as demonstrated by the treehouse scene. Essentially, he's removed from this cushioned-up realm of safety and thrown into a disillusioned, morbid world, which the film aesthetically captures. There's nothing specifically fantastical or stylistic about it. Most of the setting is rather mundane and ordinary, and the supporting characters are never played as fun or joyous bar the grandmother. The only actual fantasy is the witches, but it comes as such a purposely frightening and overwhelming spectacle that it's absent of the typical quirkiness you'd expect from a children's story like this. It's worth pointing out that there's never a motive given to why the witches want to exterminate children, let alone any illusion, yet it fits appropriately into Dahl's introduction to realism. Children's literature is rarely ambiguous. There's always clarity and explanation to help children understand the story, but by putting our heroes and children who we sympathize with in danger without reason or cause, gives it a more earthly feel. It's not that Dahl was acting cynical, but rather confronting kids with the reality that the world is never black and white. It wasn't uncommon in Dahl books to have children seemingly reject or question adulthood. In The Witches, there's attention given to this transitional period in life similar to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Whereas older people are beginning to face their mortality, children are beginning to understand maturity. At least until you consider Dahl's original ending. Here's the thing, the film employs a good witch into the story to turn Luke back to normal following his transformation into a mouse at the hands of the witches. In the book, on the other hand, the boy accepts his life as a mouse because he doesn't want to outlive his grandmother, as it would leave him alone in a world he sees as dangerous. It's not just an existential awareness of mortality from a child, but similar to the girl in the painting, having lost his parents has somewhat made him accept that life is too short anyway, and the last person in his life that loves him is his grandmother. In a way, the story perpetuates a feeling of loneliness, which the film then compounds with the isolated hotel and the overwhelming chaos within said hotel from his mouse's smaller perspective. There's even the continuous contrast between Luke and his grandmother and how out of place they feel in this abrasive, self-absorbed environment. Ironically, unlike the witches, who openly embrace this lifestyle despite their artifice and abnormality. Naturally, Rowan Atkinson couldn't be more perfectly cast to embody the sardonic hotel owner, channeling John Cleese's Basil Fawlty from Fawlty Towers, given it was a major inspiration on Atkinson's sarcastic comic style in Not the 9 O'Clock News and Black Adder, which in their own right had mild similarities to Dahl's sense of humour. I think, overall, what always seems to be recurring is that there's an eerily uncanny quality that isolates Luke and his grandmother within the hotel, whether it be Angelica Houston's snide, menacing presence, Atkinson being a smartarse, the Jenkins snobbery, or just the hotel employees' general vanity and buffoonery. There is a constant feeling of disconnect. I suppose it brings the core themes full circle. Things in life can be sudden, unexpected, and unpreventable. Loss is always around them, and even literally presented through motifs like the grandmother's refusal to talk about her missing thumb, or the boy losing part of his tail trying to escape the kitchen. Simply put, what makes The Witches so messed up as a childhood narrative is entirely displayed back in the girl trapped in the painting. There is no absolutes or way of making total sense of this crazy, unpredictable world. And even though we aim to soften children's experiences to make their transition into later life more comprehensible, the reality is that life in any shape or form can be changed or taken away so inconsequentially. Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of The Witches, and also let me know if there's a book from your childhood that disturbed you. I'm very curious to see what people say on that. If you enjoy what I do here and you want to get early access, even get your name in the credits, you can do so by heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel there. I am very grateful for those that have pledged. It's helped keep the lights on for this show, you could say. You can also head over to Twitter and Instagram. I'm on those platforms as well. And yeah, stay safe, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Bye.